Alrighty, we'll call this development committee meeting to order. Stand for the pledge, please. Mr. Aiken.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Miss Kathy, if you could take the roll, please.
Carter,
Here.
Picken,
Here.
Lee,
Alrighty. Mr. Lee has to work tonight, so we will be without his presence. Alright, Scott, why don't you take her away with the high grass and weeds thing?
All right, and I do want to mention that Mr. Kunzman has joined us, just so you can become familiar with the development committee and kind of how this process works.
Welcome, Mr. Kinsman.
We're the quickest committee. You're lucky. Okay.
So with the high grass and weeds, any commercially zoned property or property 1.5 acres in size or less is subject to mowing high grass and weeds. And high grass and weeds is determined 8 inches in height or above. So every year we get complaints on some lots that would be in platted subdivisions that exceed the acreage threshold where we have no enforcement power in terms of getting the high grass and weeds taken care of. Also, we have some where there may be apartment complexes that would make sense to see those maintained, but the whole complex may be 3 acres. We don't have any enforcement power with that. Luckily, we've been able to go out and say, hey, do you mind taking care of this? They do it, but if anyone were to say refuse, we would have no way to get that issue taken care of. So with that, we went through and highlighted some amendments to this that would include more properties that would come under the provisions for high grass and weeds. So with that, on the first page at the bottom, there's 7 items on there. So number 1 is all commercially zoned properties. That's existing. That's currently in the code as it is, so that is not a change. It would just remain. The next would be all industrial zone properties. So if it's M1 or planned manufacturing, they would be required to maintain their property. All properties zoned planned development district, and planned development district encompasses, it could be a subdivision, it could be commercial, it could be industrial. It just depends upon the nature of how the planned development district was approved. My concern is if it says all commercially zoned properties, someone could say, yes, I'm a commercial use, but I'm zoned planned development district, therefore I don't have to mow my yard. So that was why this was included. All multifamily residential, as I mentioned, apartment complex, this will cover that. All manufactured home residential, this would be trailer park or similar to Summit Ridge Estates. We've had some folks complain about grass up there. That's the Rona manufactured neighborhood off of Cleveland. Also, we had up the minimum threshold to 2 acres in size or less. And then we also included all properties located within platted subdivisions. So those would be all except number 1. The remaining 6 would be amendments to the proposed regulations. And that is, I included the section of the code, 521.11. So A has the red line in terms of how that would fit into the code. I also did want to mention, when it comes to enforcement, under additional comments on the first page, it says that if there's a property that does not comply with the order to mow, then the city is to have it mowed. If the property is occupied, we tend to go the mayor's court route, just because to send a mowing company out to a house that is occupied from a planning and zoning standpoint seems like a safety issue, that if someone shows up into someone's backyard and just starts mowing, we could see things going south quickly. One thing to do would just be to send an officer with it, but then how much time and resources do we want to expel to have a grass violation mitigated? So with that, we go the mayor's court route if the property is occupied. If the property is unoccupied, we will have it mowed because there's no safety issue in terms of someone living at the property. Also, another comment we had is, if the planning and zoning department were to send someone to a property to have it mowed, We take the cost of their mowing, add on administrative costs, and then we have to come to council to say, we did this, is this okay? Then council says that's okay, then we move forward with placing a lien on the property. To us, it seems a little bit backwards, because then if we go out and council were to say, why did you do that? That's not okay. We've already expended the money to do it. That it might be something to consider if we want to move beyond just the proposed amendments today, that we have an issue, we come to council and say, this property needs mowed. From the mowing company, it would be X, administrative costs would be Y for a total of Z. Shall we proceed? And then that way we get authorization to do so first, and then come back to council later and say, here's the before and after, it's done, then we move forward with putting the lien on the property.
So, is that section 7?
In the code on the attachment, it is
E maybe?
E
I'm
and
sorry.
F,
Okay.
arguably D, E, and F.
Okay, my first comment to that would be, I don't know that changing that part of it, moving council into every time you, first of all, I don't know how many of these we have, but always having council approving that, where my gut feeling is that the administration can make that determination by itself. If we get to a situation where something was mown and we say, why'd you do that? Don't ever do it that again or whatever, you know, we might get a $200 penalty, but it'll begin to kind of create when we do and when we don't. And then you don't end up with council, if for some reason something were to happen and council missed a quorum or something, now you've missed an entire month or period of time, you know, or if it fell right, I guess you could get in there almost 3.5 weeks, and now instead of 8 inches, it's 14. So that's my gut feeling on that. The other thing I was gonna, I talked to you briefly about this, and I don't know how you or Mr. King or Ms. Carter feels about it, but the changing the lot sizes from 1.5 to 2, I think that for the most part, I don't see us ever having platted subdivisions in excess of 2 acres. That's an awfully big, I mean, 1.5 would be big, but it could happen, and it has happened, right?
Correct.
And even this takes care of even lots in those subdivisions. My concern when I originally heard about this was, are we gonna make people who just have a house out in the country suddenly have to, you know, I have a house on, I don't know, 2 acres, and the front part of it is well manicured and looks nice, and the back part I keep as a fallow field because it's next to something else. And then all of a sudden my neighbor decides to put in a pool and he's mad, and I've moved out to the country to not do all this mowing, and I kinda think that the 1.5 is okay the way it is, and I'd be interested in any comments about that across the board. My suggestion, that's my suggestion, but I only caught that late this afternoon, so I haven't really floated this past anybody.
And from our perspective with putting it in there, there's some properties on, if you look at McIntosh or Mink or Summit, Columbia, that years ago, you could see they did lot splits and sold off some frontage of a farm. So these properties are clustered together in what essentially is a subdivision-like setting due to their proximity, where you can see if a neighbor doesn't mow their yard, that would directly affect you. And I can see how these were originally written, that from that perspective, it's a rural lot. We should let rural be rural, and if it's more developed, remain more developed. So looking at that, and as we discussed today, looking at those lots, a lot of those would already fall under if there was an issue, they would be 1.5 acres or less. So I don't believe upping it to 2 acres is completely necessary. So if we were to remove that provision from the amendment, that would be fine by us. Typically what we've done with the 2 acres, I know as it relates to accessory buildings, that's kind of the threshold between rural and not rural. But this was designed to include some of those, where you could have somebody who doesn't mow and directly affects their neighbor. But if we leave it as is at 1.5 acres or less, planning and zoning has no objections to that.
And, I'm just kicking it out there, it's not a hill.
I was just gonna say, you know, a half acre is not a deal breaker one way or another. With this, I think the acre and a half has served us well, up to this point. Tim, valid comment about, coming to council to seek approval prior to going in mow. It certainly would slow down the process, and we could end up with something, that's taller, than it was when the complaint was brought forward. I guess I would, in those instances, I'd much rather err on the side of going and doing it and seeking forgiveness from council if need be in the future in order to address the concerns of, neighboring properties.
Well, I was gonna say the exact same thing. It seems to me that, you know, I know that I trust you guys to make certain decisions, right? So if you as, planning and zoning director has deemed this property were necessary to take those steps, then I'm gonna trust your judgment in that. I don't know that, not just for the time of, you know, the next meeting coming up or whatever, or just a matter of, you know, bogging down everything. And isn't it, within your guys' discretional authority? I mean, how much does that typically cost? What would you guess?
We have one coming up that would be $750, and this is unoccupied. This is because typically if it's occupied that someone's living there, we go mayor's court. So
Right.
few and far between do we ever go and mow it. I think this is the first one in about 3 years that we've got to. So this would be, the estimate we got was $750, then we tack on administrative costs for like 20%, so you're probably getting close to potentially $1,000, but it's few and far between.
I don't think that's necessary to come
No.
back.
I
I mean,
wouldn't-
is it even after the fact, after you do it, do you have to come back to council for approval?
We do, only to get
code.
authorization to put it on their, property tax bill.
I see.
That's what
I
that's
see.
what we're coming to seek from council, not necessarily can we go and mow it, because I think where you were going, that's certainly within our spending threshold to do that.
Yes.
We do need to get authorization from council, we need that in order to
To
put it on
assess.
their property tax bill. And I can tell you, in my time here, I've never seen council vote no on one of those when we brought it to them, and I think that is because it's serving the public good by getting these things mowed.
I mean, and in addition to that, your judgment would tell you, you know, if you have something that's a little dicier, or that you would probably let us know anyhow, right? So
Mhm.
before you went forward, just to make sure we were rowing in the boat with you, so, I mean, I don't think it's necessary to come to us that.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
And then the other thing I would say is, if I don't, knowing how we typically do enforcement across the board of the city, it's not like we have a fleet of mowers chomping at the bit like a towing company outside Ohio State Stadium.
Right.
Where you run out and mow real quick when we're looking to make $200. Usually they've been through a process, and so, you know, it's not, that's not quite what's going on. I always like for the ward representatives to know if an action is being taken in their ward, if that can be, I don't know if it necessarily has to be added to I don't know how Sturm und Drang we need to be about it, you know, but if letting a ward member know, hey, just so you know, we're gonna be out mowing this and it's in your ward, we've had this, and, you know, I think that's good. It's always good to let the ward, representatives know that that's happening, but that's just a bug in your ear, and it's just, you know.
And that's completely fine. We're happy to do that. It's typically if we mow, it's unoccupied and we have no other recourse.
Sure.
So few and far between, so that's fine that if one does come up that we're gonna have to mow it, we'll let council, particularly the ward representative, know ahead of time if this is happening.
I think that could go a long way towards, you know, if they go, yeah, that's and sometimes, if I know council, you're probably getting it from them in the first place.
Right.
Right.
So I get that, so, that would be and I don't know, I mean, it's up to you guys where I haven't heard, not that my job to question Ms. Carter, but, what do you think about the 150 versus 2?
I don't know, and that's where, when we start talking, our city is set up, we're we're so unique
Mhm.
that it's difficult because an acre and a half in one spot isn't the same as an acre and a half in another spot. An acre and a half in one spot could have a direct neighbor. An acre and a half in another spot could not, or two for that matter. So this is where I think the controversies always come in when we have tried to amend code to have some recourse for people who don't maintain things. So how do we determine which properties we address and which properties we don't address? Do we go by where their nearest neighbor is? Do we go by, I don't know if lot size alone is enough or should be the only determining factor. Am I off base?
Not at all. So we have anything commercial, so this would be, as it exists now, anything commercial, so BP
Right.
or the Kroger Center, that's commercially zoned, it's regardless of size, it's under the purview. Where we've run into issues is they exceed the acre and a half threshold, but they might be in a platted subdivision, and we get calls for this pretty much every year, that we have to say, they exceed that threshold, you're in a platted subdivision, everybody else is mowing, but there's this guy at the end of the street that he has a foot tall grass, but unfortunately we can't do anything. So, from a platted subdivision standpoint, arguably the rationale would be if you live in a platted subdivision, typically yards are maintained to that standard. So adding this to that, regardless of lot size,
Isn't a big deal.
would be appropriate for that location.
And would catch those instances.
And we would catch those. So having to up it to 2, as we mentioned, it's like I could see the need for my concern with some of those lots that are close together that could create an issue. We haven't seen it, so maybe it's always good to try and be proactive with this, but you don't want to go too far. And since we haven't seen any issues, maybe we leave it at acre and a half for now, because those properties that have been problematic in the past, where we haven't been able to help and address residents' complaints, would be captured within that platted subdivision addition. So we would have that covered, so those in the future we could address. And then like with the apartment complexes or the trailer parks or other places like that we've had issues adding the multifamily zoning classification, that if you're zoned for apartments, you're required to maintain. If you're zoned for a trailer park, you're required to maintain, but then we don't go out towards those rural lots and start trying to encompass those that maybe we don't need to do that. So I think we can achieve and overcome the deficiencies we've seen without upping the acreage requirement with all the other revisions.
If that's the case, then I would prefer to keep it at an acre and a half.
Agreed.
I'm sorry, what she said?
I would prefer to keep it at acre and a half, if we feel like we can encompass what we need to with what we already have, just by adding some, some different stipulations on there, that would probably be better, only because we have the unique setup that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
And as I was looking at this and we start talking about, the property maintenance code or whatever, and the referendum that we had in the past, I think it tells us we do not have a one-size-fits-all code for the city. It's not fair to the residents in the city. I don't know for sure, but I'm certain that there was some political motivation in the past, or there were some underlying personal issues that were driving some of those things. And I just wanna make sure we steer far away from that we're staying, unbiased, neutral, and doing what we really think is best across the board.
I agree.
And I think that this isn't the only code we need to look at when it comes to those type of things. And that kind of leads into what I was thinking with this, when we come to situations where neighbors have no recourse and neither do we, because we end up in you know, the 30 days and whatever else. And I know there's a couple other situations, cars that have been what they deem abandoned or whatever. So I think we need to start looking at other areas and making some necessary changes as we move forward.
I wouldn't disagree. A lot of the code enforcement, there's not a standardized notification procedure. We typically do, we're not required by code, but we do a door hanger where it's first contact to try and talk to you in person. If not, we'll leave a door hanger to say, hey, there's a issue, let's see how we get this resolved. Courtesy letter, again, not required by code, but that is a friendly letter that sometimes people don't know that you needed a permit or you can't do this. Honest mistake, we don't want to hit them with the, you have X days to correct this or you're going to mayor's court. We'd like to seek resolution of it than be punitive. So then when you get to the violation, that's where it goes in multiple different ways, where this is, you have to post it on the property, they have 30 days, you have to put something in the newspaper, where for this, it's this way, that it would be easier to consolidate that last step in any code violation we have would be, this is the step that we take. Because for certain things, like for example, if you're taking out the trash bag ripped, trash fell on the ground, you have 30 days to clean that up. Whereas other things, if it's a different type of trash, you have 10 days. So it's all over the board that it seems like, and I think it's just over time these have been added that maybe it's time to consolidate it and say what makes sense, and let's do this in a more standardized way. So I wouldn't disagree, and I think that would probably make Mr. Blake very happy to.
Well, and that's part of what I was thinking about, you know, making us more effective in what we can do, right? So better using our time and finding ways that we can create opportunities for our employees to be able to do more without doing all the crazy. So I would be interested in seeing some of those things discussed as we go forward. So if you, I mean, and just a few come to mind for me. I think a couple that always stand out is obviously the cars. People have complaints about cars left parked all the time. Basketball hoops in parking areas or whatever, and I know we have a lot of that when it comes time for our guys to plow. You know, we have a lot of issues with the parked cars and the basketball hoops or things left in the street. So those seem like they would be a priority to address. And the trash, that's ridiculous. We need to clean up the trash.
And what we could do, as we move forward, if it's at the pleasure of the development committee, maybe I can work with Mr. Blake and identify here the top 5, 10 violations that we see repeatedly, and maybe work to consolidate these in one section of the code. With the comprehensive plan coming up as it is, would it make more sense to get that done? Then we dive into the code enforcement aspect as well, so we don't have too many large projects going on at once, that we can focus our efforts. Get the comprehensive plan done, onto the next one.
I would agree with that. I mean, we spent a lot of time last year going through all the subdivision requirements and the different things. Before we can have a really effective comprehensive plan, we have to have, if we have stuff like this lingering, it won't do us any good. So we're gonna need some consistencies created. So I think that would be great if you could talk to him and we could get some of those things moving.
Okay.
Mr. Aiken?
Can you refresh my memory on where we go with the high grass and weeds thing now? You'll take it back and modify it a little bit. I think we're not gonna discuss it tonight at council, other than Ms. Carter's report probably. Is that right?
Yeah, typically policy has been, if there's a code amendment, it comes to development committee for discussion. Once development committee is comfortable, so more than likely we'd have another development committee scheduled, we come back with the revisions. Development committee says it's okay, we proceed through the code amendment process, which would be planning commission, then a public hearing before council, 3 readings and then 30 days and then it's official.
Or to save a step, if the committee, it sounds like there's consensus amongst leaving it at 1.5 acres versus the 2, including these other zoning districts in here. We could certainly make a recommendation in that direction that could be modified and presented to planning commission to avoid the need to wait for another development committee meeting to move it forward.
And I'm fine with that. Whatever expedites things, I think
That's
is
gonna
probably
be the best way to go.
Seeing that, I'd like to make a motion to approve the high grass and weed section 521.11 as amended. Is that the way I would say that?
I would say make a recommendation for the code amendments as presented with the amendment of keeping it at 1.5 acres.
In an effort to save my breath, so moved.
And before I second that, I just wanna make sure, and it already states in there that you don't have to come to council, right? That was just a recommended change.
Yeah, that was just the situation that we thought, would it make sense to go the other way, but seeing as the frequency of this actually happening where we mow it, I don't think it necessarily needs to be changed. So it is already, we mow it, come to council and say, this is what we did. If you then approve it, then we put the lien on the property. So that's how it is today.
Okay, I'll move that. Then I second.
Carter,
Yes.
Hicken,
Yes.
Alrighty. Do you guys have anything else? I have one quick question for the development committee for Scott.
I do not.
Have anything else you think we need to discuss?
Madam Chairwoman, I have just a quick statement for Scott,
Okay.
since Jack probably won't be here for any other meetings tonight. I'm getting repeated, people calling me and telling me that, Jack is extremely, personable, working with our residents when they have questions about businesses, their signage, everything that's going on in the city, and to have that come back that quickly, Jack, I'm very appreciative, because we're still rebuilding that planning and zoning department from many years ago. We started from scratch, and now we have Scott, and we've got Lisa, and we've got Steve, and we've got you, so thank you very, very much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I would second that. I think we didn't have probably the best relationship with the community in the past. And Scott, you've done a lot of hard work in that department
Thank you.
to create those relationships. And Steve's a great addition, Lisa. So the only confusion for me is Jack and Zach. So so I'm gonna have to, maybe I'll have to call you like Jim or something.
I recommended that you just call me a different name every time.
Oh, that'd be fun too. Okay. I can do that.
Yeah, that zoning guy.
Yeah.
You know, Albert. The only other thing is, okay, so how do we resolve the situation of people setting up yard sales at the lot at the old Summit Town Inn? The lot
Did it happen
regularly looks
again?
like crap.
It did
Yes.
this Saturday, and Mel let me know that while we were at the cookout, and I mentioned it to one of the sergeants that was there, and they were gonna send somebody down. I think, how we resolve it, I think, there's a couple of approaches. It always happens on the weekend when nobody in the planning and zoning department is around, so there certainly is an opportunity, I think, to flex a schedule where Steve could work, certainly on a Saturday here and there when they're not sure he's gonna be here, and also, through reporting it to the police as they're here, because people are certainly trespassing and they're operating illegally without a permit, so I think, doing those two approaches are gonna be the most effective way to, handle it.
Well, the worst thing is, then on Sunday, they put a sign up of the stuff that doesn't sell, and it says free,
I mean, they leave all the junk sitting
and
there.
it's just junk and trash,
So, should
Sorry
we
about
start with asking the property owner to post signs? That it's, I don't know what the first notification is. I'm trying to find a way, this is just a constant problem. And last weekend, it was just one lady out there on a lawn chair, but she had a lot of crap. So, that she left. But it is every weekend. If it's a nice weekend, there's somebody out there.
And we have, the property owner is aware of it. and we've contacted them. We've contacted them about the weeds and the grass along the front. They finally got that mowed. It got to the point that said, last chance, or we're mowing it for you and billing you, and then they got it done. So they're aware of the cars for sale, the yard sales, things of that nature, because we can cite the person there, but we don't have any of their information to say, we need to bring you into mayor's court because you keep doing it. We don't have that information. So we'd have to go with the property owner. We've talked with the property owner about posting signs about trespassing, because from my understanding, that's how the police department could go in and say, you don't have authorization to be here, you're trespassing, you need to leave. So it has been brought up to them, but they don't, from what I've seen, the property owner does not seem too motivated to do much about it unless kind of their feet are held to the fire. So we can follow up again with them. As BJ mentioned, we could flex some schedules and have Steve come in on a Saturday. The hard part is it was happening, then the pipes were there, and it stopped, so then it started again. The hard part is, and we could surely do it, but then if he comes in on a Saturday, there's no activity, comes in on another Saturday, there's no activity, and somehow we
Right,
miss
well-
connection. So there's
Wasted a Saturday.
a possibility to do it. I think getting the property owner to put up those signs would be one thing. I think another way we could do it is, I think through the garage sale regulations, you need, arguably that's a garage sale, that we could cite the property owner if someone were to see it, that, hey, property owner, there's a garage sale on your property, you're the owner of record, we're citing you for it, and at what point does it motivate them to put up the signs and then go that route? So we can look into that and let them know that, hey, you had another sale there, you may not have been aware of it, but you need to take the appropriate steps to do this because you're, by default, allowing this to happen on your property without taking the appropriate steps to not allow it to happen. So
And honestly, Scott, that's exactly what I was looking for, because all we are is reactionary. And honestly, flexing Steve's schedule isn't always gonna work. I mean, while he might find other things, on a Saturday, I'm not also out trying to, get people on the weekends either. That's not the point. So that's exactly what I wanted to know is if we could cite the property owner because people are out there.
we could certainly do that. I think from the standpoint, if we do the door hanger courtesy letter, those aren't required by code. So I think perhaps if we were notified that this happened, I think we can get through those 2 steps and put them on notice. For the violation letter, Steve will have to witness it, and then potentially, and definitely for a mayor's court summons, if we get that far, Steve has to witness it. So we'll have to catch them.
A police citation doesn't suffice?
A police citation could work, but from my understanding, it wouldn't be the zoning route, it would be more a police route, but my understanding is they needed no trespassing signs on the property, and they don't have them, so then the police can't enforce that. So we'd have to go out, Steve would have to see, oh, there's a garage sale, you don't have a permit, you're in violation for not having a garage sale permit. Then on the property, you're given, I believe, 2 a year, so clearly they've surpassed their amount,
Maybe.
permit or no permit.
And I don't know how I think we can make this work. I think if we talk to Steve and maybe did something along the lines of, listen, we're not gonna ask you to just come in and sit around on a Saturday and wait for these people to put their vacuums out, but we could, say, hey, we've had a report that they're out there. We need you to go look at it. And then maybe we can, adjust his time accordingly from there, if that's something he's willing to work with.
I think Steve's willing to do that. I think if this comes up, that we're notified that there's a garage sale or a sale happening on this property, are you available to come out, do the code enforcement process, and then you're done, we can flex accordingly, but then it's not hoping that this is the right Saturday, we know it's happening, we can
They'll
come
get a
in
picture.
directly on that.
The next thing I would need to know, then who do I contact? You,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So if I let you know, and then it can go down.
It'll be
trickle
put in
down.
motion.
Because I'll be honest, I feel a little petty calling the non-emergency police line to report a garage sale on an empty lot. I do. It's not generally the kind of thing that, I do. But it's a problem. That lot is a problem. How many times have we had to go through this weed and clean up your lot business with them?
Pretty much annually.
This has been a consistent, regular
Mm-hmm.
thing. This isn't like the first time we've gotten to the point where we're like, now we're gonna send someone, and they go out and mow it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alright. Anything else?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Carter,
Yes.
Aiken,
Yes. Thank you, Scott.
Richard?
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Albert? Ringo?
Anything but Steve.